discussions, I'd like to at least have an introduction with some type of background of the technical writer. Because as I wrote, it's equally as important who the technical writer was or is as to what is written. And so I'd like to, I know Shawnee sent some preliminary background information, but is the technical writer here?
They are not here tonight.
Oh, so, okay. Well, then I guess that's that.
So what we're here to do tonight is review the draft report of it, and this is based off of the research points that we put in to that research document, based off the pain points that we came up together as a reparations task force. So again, we're going to be reviewing it. Shane has helped put together a PowerPoint presentation so that we can go through it and look at the recommendations, but then also if there's any additional information or any additional corrections you may see for the draft, please let us know in a timely manner.
As a means of, excuse me, Mr. President, Chair.
Speak into the mic, please.
As a means of process, Ms. Shawnee, could you just restate or reread what the, that's for me? Okay, thank you. Can you just restate or reread what the charge was for the task force so that we can make sure that we're on point when we begin to discuss the recommendations?
I will have to take a moment to pull that out and open it up for you.
And while you're doing that, can I just take a couple minutes to say what I think the charge was?
Sure.
Because it's important that if we're discussing reparations, the charge is to determine what policies exist or have existed that denied former slaves the rights of citizenship. And so as I've discussed it, this point with Mayor Baker, it's really one question. And the question is whether or not citizens of the City of Wilmington who have in fact descended from chattel slaves, does the City of Wilmington recognize these individuals as citizens as pertaining to the United States Constitution, 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment? And so I guess my participation will center around that question. Thank you.
Okay, so the charge is, and I'm going to read from the now therefore portion of the resolution. Now therefore be it resolved by the Council of the City of Wilmington that a City Council task force to study and develop reparation proposals for African Americans with a special consideration for African Americans who are descendants of persons enslaved in the United States shall be established. The City Council President of the 108th session of City Council, hereinafter President, shall appoint and the appointment shall be approved by a majority of all members of City Council. Be it further resolved, the task force shall be composed of area experts in fields closely related to African American history, economic development, finance, and other related fields who have actively demonstrated an interest and expertise in efforts to promote diversity, equality, equity, and understanding of civil and human rights, and to dismantle injustice, discrimination, bigotry, hatred, and harassment within the city, as evidenced through the production of a resume, recommendation letters, and/or other relevant documentation. The proposed members shall hold no other public office or paid public employment. The president shall designate one member as the chairperson and one as the vice chairperson. Be it further resolved, the task force shall meet at a minimum on a quarterly basis with such additional meetings as is deemed necessary to properly perform its duties. Be it further resolved, the task force shall make findings and recommendations to City Council regarding issues of systemic racial disparity, racist practices and procedures, and/or institutional discrimination against African Americans resulting from the delivery or provision of city government services or the implementation or effect of city policies, and resulting from the delivery or provision of other government-provided services or widely implemented business practices, or the implementation or effect of government policies or business practices. Specifically, the task force shall recommend, among other things, the form of compensation that should be awarded, the instrumentalities through which it should be awarded, and who shall be eligible for this compensation. Be it further resolved, in the performance of its duties, the task force may coordinate with community organizations such as the National Conference for Community and Justice, the American Civil Liberties Union, the Urban League, and the National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, as well as educational institutions of its choosing. Be it further resolved, the task force shall make its findings and recommendations to City Council within 180 days of its appointment, and that has been extended.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right, thank you all. So we've clearly established our purpose. So thank you, Brother Dwight and Shani, for going over our charge. I think one of the main things that I think we should address today and discuss that's not clear in the report is who precisely gets the reparations, and that needs to be a discussion because language is important. So although, and paraphrasing from the report with this one, although most of Delawareans' enslaved population were in Kent and Sussex counties, the city of Wilmington also had enslaved people into the mid-1800s. In Wilmington, acts of violence against people of African descent continued into the 1900s, including the lynching of George WITN on June 23, 1903. After slavery ended in Wilmington, the formerly enslaved population who were of African descent would continue to be oppressed by Jim Crow laws and their unfair practices. And as we all know, a lot of those practices continue today, although Jim Crow laws ended. At least in theory they ended. They really changed form. So the discussion point I do want for the task force at this time, and I think it's a very important one, is should reparations be for people that could trace their lineage to Wilmington from the 1800s on? And also, are there other eligibility qualifications needed to be considered for reparations?
So real quick, we have a hand raised, Leandra Casson.
I just wanted to, I see it now. I wanted to see, I didn't get a chance to see this before it's coming, before we're presenting it right now. So I just wanted to, I wish that we could also get it sent to us directly, this PowerPoint, just so that we could, and to read over it. Because one thing I forgot to put in here, so I just wanted to look and see if it's under criminal justice reform. If not, I was going to try to add the information and send it to Gabe to add it after we talked about it. So I just wanted, that's what I was talking about. That's why my hand.
Thank you for that.
Dr. Marshall, I'm sending it now, so you'll have it in your inbox in a few seconds. In addition to that, Gabe did get your email. I think he responded that he's going to incorporate that information that you sent over today into the report.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Before we continue, I just want to acknowledge that Daryl Chambers has joined the discussion.
All right. And just to give us a good foundation, a fair foundation, that did look at other reparation recommendations made in other places. Usually they suggested that reparations would be for African Americans or people of African descent in the area that they were in charge with, where ours would be the city of Wilmington. And there were specific years used in most. Some went back to 1850. And some were included all of the 1800s. for those that were eligible to receive reparations. And I think for ours, we definitely know that it goes back to the 1800s. I think the first discussion point is, do we have an end year? Because we do, even in the charge that was reread today, City Council is acknowledging that the practices, including the business practices and housing disparities, are continuing today. So when do we want to end the year for the qualifications of those that qualify for reparations for the City of Wilmington?
Sir, could you repeat that again?
Sure. So in other areas that have recommended reparations, they have usually 1800s is the year for the people that are eligible to receive the reparations for the area they're in charge of. For the city, of course, we are charged by the City Council of the City of Wilmington. And what year do we want to end the qualification for reparations in the City of Wilmington? Or do we want to end it?
Well, can I just, if you don't mind, this is Leandra Castle Marshall again. The reason why I wanted to, I think that we might not let it in because I've been doing research on public leasing and the and what this author calls the new peonage, which I wanted to actually write about. It's just different fines and things that have been given to persons, basically because they were poor or black, additional fines that were given, constantly given by the judicial system. And so I don't know whether we looked at those various fines that are given. And I can read just a couple things if you guys can hear me. I don't know if we're clear, but
You are.
there were a couple of things that I wanted to mention. It says there are typically two types of debt that lead to court action and a risk of incarceration. The first is private debt resulting from unpaid credit card balances, medical bills, car payments, and payday loans and other high internet short-term cash advances relied upon by low-income people. This type of debt can result in a creditor or a debt collector suing the debtor in court. But then if they prove that it's willful, they can actually put them in prison. And we have a history of these kinds of practices. The other one is the legal financial obligations, which the court system imposes upon criminal defendants in three categories: fines or monetary penalties as a condition of the sentence to punish for the commission of a criminal offense. These are just different additional things that I wanted to add in the criminal justice because there are some reforms that need to happen in that area when it comes to fines and the criminalization of the homeless. But I can just I can send it to whoever would like to, and then we could look at that issue as well. I just think when I was looking at the criminal justice, I don't know if it took into account the exorbitant of people have to pay, and it's really based on if you're located or specifically in the courts in the City of Wilmington. I didn't know if anybody else did research on that, but that came up over and over again, so I just wanted to make sure that we mentioned it.
I have a question for Dr. Caston.
Yes, go ahead.
Dr. Caston,
Yes.
I understand exactly what you're saying. But, my question is, are these things public policy or are they law? And
Some of them are public policies and some of them are laws because it's a relationship between the judicial system and the business owners and the city and federal governments.
so
And they work together. And as I was researching this, as we know, just to give an example, if you have vagrancy and they say the bill is $25, then they'll add all these other penalties on a person who's already, vulnerable financially. And what it has resulted in is large amount of people going to prison for quote unquote, because they're saying they're willfully not paying these fines, but because of the way it's set up, it's very difficult for them to, to constantly pay the fine. So another example is a person who goes to, again, it's a petty crime at first, and then what happens, they begin to tack on, again, other fines. And so I wanted to look into that because I wanted to see if proportionate based on the person's color. And what the research shows is that it is, if they're low income and if they're of African American descent, then they are 50 to 60% more likely incarcerated in Wilmington and in Kent and Sussex, unfortunately. And so I just didn't want to leave that out because those things were illegal, but then they were able to have loopholes, and like this paper says, on the edges. You can just
Mr. Chairman,
send this paper to all of you, and then you all could read it, and then you'll see if you want to connect it. But I think I don't think we should leave this part out because it is a racial bias that has caused that I think needs to be in the reparations discussion.
I agree. And Mr. Chairman, can
Hold
I?
on. There's
I'd like-
one person who has their hand up before you.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Alicia?
Hey, Kobe. In response to the question of if we should include some type of eligibility qualifications, I'm not necessarily inclined to say that we should have the burden placed on community members to be able to trace their lineage to Wilmington from the 1800s, especially since we've talked so much about how so much of this work is a result of generational inequality. So I think that could be a place where we could have some more discussion around what eligibility qualifications could look like.
Thank you.
Mr.
Brother
Chair-
Dwight.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, the reason I pose that question is because that is the question. The question is whether or not the descendants of chattel slaves are receiving the disparate treatment, and whether or not it's based upon law, order, governmental principles, or is it public policy? And so what I'd like to do is offer an Oxford Dictionary definition of public policy, because it's my understanding that public policy are functions carried out as law, even though they are not law. So we need to look at the city of Wilmington's processes as it pertains to everything we've discussed and determine, am I being treated adversely? Is it the law or is it just public policy? And I appreciate it, Shawnee, if you could look at the Oxford or Webster and give us a definition so that we can have a working definition of public policy versus law. Mr. Chairman,
So
I'm requesting that of you.
So one, when it comes to that debate, I think we looked at it in both ways. I can speak to the research that I did, especially with housing. It wasn't necessarily a law not to give, deeds to African Americans. It was a policy, right? It wasn't a red line map that was passed here in the city of Wilmington like it was in other states. So that's some of the things that, at least for my section of it, that I looked at. And that's why in here, you see under the, skipping forward a little bit, but under housing, a part of that is establishing a Wilmington Reparations Housing Fund, which is something I'm very passionate about for the purpose of addressing that public policy mishap, in which they could have used a law to prohibit it, but chose not to, either over, people outcrying about it. Now, I will say this also. Just because redlining took place here many years ago, we are still facing a lot of housing crisis right here, right now. Just the other day in the news, Navy Federal Credit Union was denying African Americans loans who had good credit, who was in good standing, for the sole purpose that they were African Americans. So I think I agree with Alicia on not us kind of putting parameters on who should qualify for this, but looking at how we can impact the community that is currently here in the future going forward.
Mr. Chairman, I think you're really talking about almost four different things. Remember, departments establish policies. After the federal government, Congress passes a law, every department then sets up policies. So they are theoretically implementing the law through policies. So everybody in government that's in a department has policies that are not connected directly to law. Then you have law, which is enacted by legitimate governmental bodies that says this is the law that you shall live by. So I think you've got that. And you just got outside of that, when you just talked about the credit union 9, you got the private sector that sets its own rules also within what they consider within the law. They set policies which can be discriminatory also. So I think you got to look at these things as cross-purpose, that if I pass a law, I'm giving it to a department to implement it. It's like the police department has the white book. I think it's about 3 inches thick. That's all policy. Now, so you really have to understand how you're going to get to all of these different things.
Correct.
But they do impact, and they have, like fines we were just talking about, and putting people in jail because they couldn't pay the money when they weren't adjudicated for that.
And so if I may, on that point, that's the charge, is to determine, and I did ask for a working definition of public policy, because everyone may not know or able to distinguish between public policy and law. For example, the University of Delaware has a school of public policy, but public policy is not law. So now, if we're looking at the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment to determine whether or not those who are of ascendants from chattel slavery, we have to look and see whether or not they are even citizens entitled to be treated in accordance with the law. That's the question. I'm suggesting that we are not even citizens. And that's the reason that these things are taking place. So let's first determine whoever is a citizen that ascends from chattel slavery, they are the ones that are entitled for reparations.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to make sure everyone online can hear, and they're having trouble hearing.
Okay. The question, as I said, the question is citizenship. Whether or not those ascendants or descendants of chattel slavery, whether or not they are considered citizens, not residents of Wilmington, Delaware, whether or not they are citizens in accordance with the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment of the United States Constitution. That's the question. And if they are citizens, then they are entitled to reparations. And if they are not citizens, then these public policies can be used to discriminate adversely against them. Thank you.
Thank
I
you.
don't want to interrupt the discussion, but I do want to check to ensure that people in general online are able to hear. Could you just very quickly put in the chat whether or not you're able to hear the conversation that's taking place in chambers? Okay. I have one person. I think Ms. Beebe's having trouble, but Renata says she can.
Okay.
The volume varies by who's speaking. So it might be
Okay.
the distance to the mic.
Okay. So if I can ask everybody that is here, please get as close to the mic as possible, just to make sure that the people online can hear you. Thank you, everyone.
All right, thank you, everybody. So next we'll go over the recommendations. So the first recommendation stated in the report is a formal apology. That's a public apology that includes tangible outcomes. So one thing that's not stated in the report that we could add to that apology is how it should be presented or how it should be done. Should it be on government grounds? Should it be on television? You know, what kind of format should the apology be?
Brother Dwight.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, on that point, Governor Jack Morkel in 2015 issued House Joint Resolution 10, House Joint Resolution 10. And it served as not only an apology, but it was a stipulation by the state of Delaware that not only did Delaware participate in the transatlantic and Arab slave trade, but it specified how they benefited from the transatlantic and Arab slave trade. And in one of my submissions, I addressed that issue of this apology was for the entire state of Delaware with recommendations on how we can retrieve reparations from what is already law. So it's already law that applies not just to the state, but to its municipalities and subdivisions as well. So House Joint Resolution 10, Shawnee, if there's a way that you can pull that document up and share that with the task force.
I've made a note of it. I'll find it while we're in the meeting or right after. Thank you.
Thank you, Brother Dwight.
Renata has her hand up.
Renata.
Thank you. Following up on that, a formal and public apology that includes tangible outcomes, whom are we recommending that will make that apology?
Well, if that's referred to me, Governor Jack Morkel already has made the apology and in House Joint Resolution 10, which he's signed into law in 2015. So he's already made
Since
the,
this is a City of Wilmington Reparation Task
Yes.
Force, City Council, are we asking the city administration or the City Council for formal apology?
For me, it would be the head of the city government, which is the mayor's administration.
I would agree.
To apologize on behalf of the city of Wilmington for the role that they played in these policies and practices.
I agree with that, Mr. Chair. I'm just proposing, clarity in a document.
Thank you. Also, I just, a point of clarity. So, while that did take place under Jack Markell, we know that one, the state has still not lived up to their commitment for Black people across the state. But two, I do want to say it's not law. It's a strongly recommended recommendation as a joint resolution the General Assembly has not passed any laws. They do have a racial justice consortium that they are working on right now that's housed at UD, but they have not made any recommendations as of this point just yet.
No, that's not true, sir. It was signed into law. Now, I don't know from which you are making your reference, but apparently, both houses, the General Assembly, the House of Representatives, and the Senate, both passed. That's why it's called a House Joint Resolution.
So again, just to correct
And
you
it-
on that,
And it's signed into law.
joint resolution is not a law. If it was a law, it would be House bill or Senate bill. They still have to vote, just like we're asking the city council to pass a resolution to ask for this. They still have to vote on a resolution, but it is not legally binding. It does not change our law.
Mayor,
And the governor still signs it to recognize it, but it does not make it law.
Mayor Baker, I appreciate if you would just.
Mayor Baker stepped out for a
step
second.
back.
He just stepped out. I will say that I, just per the request that you made, Brother Dwight, I did find the information about House Joint Resolution 10. It said that it passed the House on this in 2016 and the Senate in 2016, and the effective date says takes effect upon being signed into law.
Yes,
So I'm going to share this with the entire group.
thank you.
You're welcome. I'm sorry.
All right. Is there any more discussion on this point?
I have a question. I just wanted to know specifically, what was the formal apology for specifically? I just wanted to know because I don't know if it goes far enough, is the point I'm making, because of the other areas that persist right now. So that's why I was asking. What does it actually say?
So
Tell me where it is.
I'm actually sending it out right now. This is Shawnee. In general, it says they're apologizing for the wrongs of slavery and expressing Delaware's profound regret for its role in slavery. It's not a very long document. It's just 3 pages, so I'm going to send it over now for your review.
is there any additional questions? If you have your hands raised, you could go ahead and speak. Shane.
All right. So for the sake of time, you're following in the slides. I'm going to skip over the slides that are pretty much summarizing the pain points and going straight to the recommendation slides. So for criminal justice recommendations, we have several. We have eliminate barriers for lawyers of African Americans, mandate bias-free training and policies for the police force, assess and remedy racially biased treatment of those of African Americans in prisons, invest funds into community violence intervention and programs that build public trust, prohibit cash bail, mandate that those that are acquitted or exonerated be reimbursed, and establish a robust communication with leaders of the African Americans in Wilmington.
Leandra?
This is where I wanted to add some of the information that has to do with peonage and convict leasing when it, and just the unfair treatment in that regard. So, like I said, I will send that information to that and see if we can have some of the laws that accompany those actions rescinded. And so I wanted to make sure that I put that in there, and then this is where I would like to add it under the criminal justice recommendation, because there's still a violation of the 13th Amendment.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
on that point, giving credit to the African American or the Black Legislative Caucus. They put together several bills around this issue that were signed into law by Governor Jack Markell. And one of those areas dealt with the fact that over 200,000 residents, AKA citizens, in the state of Delaware are eligible to have their past criminal records expunged. On the point that Dr. Casson made concerning the 13th Amendment to the United States Constitution, the 13th Amendment reads, slavery and or involuntary servitude shall not exist except as a punishment for a crime. Now, this is an exception that offered no redress at the federal level. But the state of Delaware, in further denying the rights of the chattel slaves, they recodified the legislative intent and stopped calling us Africans, but they continue to call us Negro, black, and white, and colored. And so what I'm suggesting is that the way to address this unconstitutional establishment of the Delaware Justice Information System is to make a recommendation that we will cease to be called black and white under state law, but be referred to by the names of our ancestors if they are unable to change this law. And also, I'm willing to participate in that discussion because that sums up just where we are. We're neither white nor black, but we have to be brought back to, as Mayor Baker has said, Bishop Peter Spencer, when he received the first independent charter to establish the African Union Church. He took us from chattel slavery into a people of Africans, and the state of Delaware, which includes the city of Wilmington, stopped calling us Africans and continue to call us blacks, Negroes, or colored. By changing that, we change history. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mayor Baker is back. There was a question posed while you were gone for you about the difference between a resolution and an actual bill.
Well, a law in city government is an ordinance. It requires 7 votes and 9 votes to override the mayor's veto if he doesn't like it. And a resolution is just the majority of council. It's an expression of how council feels about a particular issue. But it has no weight of law. It can be ignored or paid attention to. It just depends on how it's taken and for whom it's directed at.
Thank you for that. And again, now that I have the House Joint Resolution that was sponsored by Stephanie T. Bowden up in front of me, again, I just want to point out it was a resolution and not a law.
That's not true.
It acknowledges the fundamental injustices, the cruelty and brutality and inhumanity of slavery, apologizes on behalf of the Delaware people to African Americans, expresses the General Assembly deepest sympathy and regrets. D, recognizes the need to address and educate Delawareans on the social stigma, stereotyping, and biases and discrimination. E, expresses the General Assembly's commitment to rectifying the consequences and misdeeds committed against African Americans. And F, implores all Delawareans to tolerate and understand one another. That is all that resolution did.
No,
what
sir.
we're here today
That's
is to
not
talk
true.
about what the
That's not
That
true.
is literally what the bill, that's literally what the resolution
The
says.
bill was signed into law, whether you
Every
want to
resolution
accept it.
is signed.
No.
Every
it-
resolution
no,
is signed.
It is not.
Yes, it is.
The Wilmington City Council resolution is not the same as the state of Delaware.
Exactly, and we're here to talk about the Wilmington City Council.
And Shawnee.
We're here to talk about-
She read where it said the governor.
The governor signs every resolution that passes. It has to pass both chambers. That's how it
What is your
operationally
purpose,
works.
sir?
I am explaining for the
No, you
record.
cannot explain.
For
because
the
you-
record, it's a point of clarity.
No, it's not.
Yes, it is.
It was signed.
You're out of order.
Well, then, you are.
You're out of order.
You are uninformed.
You're out of order.
Yeah. Now, what do you want me to do?
Shane, you
Stop
can go
it?
ahead and continue.
All right, so the next area for the recommendations is housing. For housing, we have, which Kobe referred to, Chair Kobe referred to earlier, establishing a Wilmington Reparations Housing Fund, WRHF, to assist Wilmingtonians, African Americans with home ownership with subsidized down payment, closing costs, mortgage rates, and owners insurance. The fund will also revitalize, preserve, and stabilize housing of those African Americans, and the fund should assist with rental support, security deposits, and utility assistance. And last but not least, provide city property tax relief for those of African descent.
That is not our charge.
Understanding I'm not part of the task force, but just trying to make sure that we get clarity even on the last slide. One of the things I believe we are charged with doing is as a collective making recommendations. And I'm wondering with the last list of recommendations, if the task force as a whole is comfortable with what has been laid out before we move forward to housing. Because if there's any question, concern, or change that needs to be made, I want to make sure that's communicated to the writer and we make those recommended changes based on the conversation that's had today with the task force. So I see a few hands up, but I just wanted to set that context as we're continuing the conversation to make sure that as a group, you are in agreement or disagreement with some of the things that are documented. And then if there's disagreement, we should probably capture what we need to send back to the writer so that it captures the essence of what the task force suggests.
Agreed.
So how do we do that?
So there's a list of recommendations here, just for criminal justice. We could probably talk offline about the piece that you're discussing, and I'm not disagreeing with anyone, but the list of recommendations are: number 1, eliminate barriers of lawyers of African descent. Number 2, and this is just for criminal justice. Number 2, mandate bias-free training and policies for the police force. Number 3, assess and remedy racially biased treatment of those of African descent in prisons. Number 4, invest funds into community violence intervention and programs that build public trust. Number 5, prohibit cash bail, mandate that those that are acquitted or exonerated be reimbursed. Number 6 is establish robust communication with leaders of African descent in Wilmington. Those were the 6 things that were listed for criminal justice, and I understand that Dr. Leandra is going to share a few other things with the entire task force that were not included because she feels that they should be included as well. I hope I captured that right, Dr. Leandra.
Are those things under the purview
Yes.
of the city?
And
of council?
specifically dealing with addressing, I just want to make sure that we understand, there's a monetary part to this, that I do think that some of those that were unfairly targeted with excessive fines because there's an 8th Amendment, I'm going to give it to you because there's too much to say. But it's a lot of laws that have just really been broken or skirted around that I'm just going to list and then put a recommendation next to it. Maybe that's the easiest way to go. And then I'll just send it out to all of the task force members. But I think that money also needs to be given back to the African American community. It could be in the reparations fund. It could be to address things like taking suspending people's, licenses to further, make it difficult for them to, stabilize economically. It could be, I mean, there's a list of things that happen, as we know, once a person, just has any brush with the law. And so I just want to make sure that we spell that part out, just to make sure that, we're kind of clear. That's the only thing. I think that some of these recommendations are kind of general, and I just want us to add a little bit of meat to it. That's all I would say.
And we welcome you sending that to the entire task force, and we could have further discussion at our next meeting. So thank you for being willing to do that.
Renata, your hand is also up.
Great, thank you. As I read through all the recommendations and preparations for this call, I'd like to make a general statement about all the recommendations. And the general statement is that this task force has been created by the Wilmington City Council. Therefore, I believe that our recommendations need to be divided by recommendations that are directed to the Wilmington City Council as to be actionable by the Wilmington City Council. And there are other recommendations here and in subsequent sections that are worth put forth maybe as an appendix or additional section for consideration for other governmental entities. But they cannot be actionable by the City Council. Example, just on this page. Mandate bias-free training and policies for the police force, actionable by the City Council. Invest funds into community violence intervention, actionable by the City Council. Keep in mind that our current budget season is coming up, so perfect time to put forth those recommendations. But prohibit cash bail, I'm not sure if that's in the realm of power of the Wilmington City Council. And so there are examples throughout other sections that I have a concern that if we commingle what is in the realm of power of the Wilmington City Council and what it's not, the entire document will be just a beautiful document that will sit on somebody's shelf.
Absolutely.
Thank you for that, Renata.
Yes, yes, thank you, Renata. I think that is a good point to specify which recommendations are within the purview or within the responsibility of City Council also.
So to add to that, the Wilmington Reparations Housing Fund is in the purview of something that the City Council can set up. And in there was a recommendation to use the vacant property fees, 50% of the vacant property fees for the next 30 years. To go into this fund to help at least baseline the funding for it. On average, we bring in about $6 million. This is based off the last 3 years from vacant properties. We bring in about $6 million from that. So that's asking for a base minimum of about $3 million. Now, the hope of it is as you get closer to that 30-year mark, there's less funding because people are actually getting into these vacant properties. They have the funds, access to the funds to actually fix up some of these properties. And go back into their neighborhoods in which they grew up in.
How does this benefit ex-slaves?
Housing?
No, what you just said. How does that program benefit former slaves?
It's their descendants would have access to this fund.
We haven't determined who the descendants are yet.
Again, this was a part of the research that went into it, that each research was supposed to go into it, and then we're supposed to have the discussion on what qualifies someone for it. So again, this is just the research recommendations based off the research that was put into it and the recommendation and funding source for it as well too. We know that we have been deprived of generational wealth. We've been denied access to housing loans throughout this city. We've had our houses taken when they built 95. We've had multiple presentations on the housing needs here in the city of Wilmington, and what needs to go into it as well too. So again, this is all that coalesced and then an action point from that. Not just saying, hey, these were the issues, but an actual recommendation that comes from it as well too.
Well, I agree with
Can we take a
Renata
question?
that the issues actionable.
Speak into the mic, please.
Bernardo, would you please define what you mean when you say actionable?
Sure, absolutely, Brother White. I mean actionable by the Wilmington City Council. So there are items on this list that we all wanted to take place. However, the city council does not have a power to influence those. And I think we need to be, so again, going back to the housing, establishing a Wilmington Reparations Housing Fund, it's actionable. But providing city property tax relief, that's not defined by the city council.
Thank you.
Yes, it is.
Go ahead, man.
Mayor
Tax
Baker says
relief.
it is.
Tax relief
It is?
can
I thought
come,
it's the county.
If it's city
it can
tax,
come from the council and the mayor. Because
I didn't
they,
hear it.
It can
they
come from the
act,
council and
they act upon the mayor's budget and the taxation. They set the taxation when they pass the budget through their council committee meetings. But they can do that under the powers of the city.
and-
What they can't do is establish a new tax. That's only up to the General Assembly.
Ah, gotcha. So I stand corrected. If it's new tax, it's the assembly, but the tax relief can be done through the administration.
I didn't hear what she said.
She said the tax relief can be done through the administration.
And council.
Is this what I
And
heard?
council. Yes.
yes.
Okay,
Yes.
thank you. Thanks for
Yeah,
the clarification.
But Renata, it doesn't take away from your discussion that the one you used the first time, that was a better example. And I agree with that. Like, there are certain things that fall under the purview of the Wilmington City Council. There are other recommendations that are something that we'll have to go with the state with. And what I recommend is that the things that the city do have control over, we state it as such. And those things that they can advocate for to a different branch of the government, then that's something they should just advocate for, even though they don't have what I call control and authority over.
Yes, that's
So-
what I meant. Thank you, Darrell.
Yes.
Daryl, would you make a motion to create another point in which all the things that would be resolutions to go to state government or federal government that we would want from city council to do, to advocate on our behalf, would you feel comfortable making a motion to create that other point so that we don't
Yes,
lose those points, but we also keep to what our action items are under our given pain points, and then at the end add an additional point of this is what else you can do by advocating on our behalf to other government levels.
Yes, I motion to do so.
All right, is there a second?
I second it.
Thank you. It's been motioned and seconded. Is there any discussion?
I have no clarification. I need clarification on what he's exactly making a motion to do.
So some of these points aren't actionable for the city council, but they're very important to overall the people here in the city of Wilmington that would be affected by reparations. So while it may not be an action item by city council, we're not going to throw those away. We're going to ask city council to, whether it's pass a resolution or advocate on our behalf, to whatever respective government level they need to. So if it's something like cash bail, that has to go to the state level. So we're going to ask council to advocate on our behalf to the state level.
I guess what I'm trying to
Speak into the mic, please.
understand is, how does this benefit ex-slaves? We haven't
Gives them
defined,
subsidies that they need.
I beg your pardon?
It gives them subsidies that they need, because
Who-
hopefully they
well-
will get subsidized down payments and other things to offset the years of discrimination when it comes to housing in general.
But everybody,
That's what the hope is.
everybody was not a slave that this might benefit. I'm trying to figure out, how do we identify the ex-slaves that are entitled to reparation? Not come up with a program that's gonna benefit everybody, and we're gonna be faced with this, double standard of reverse discrimination. We got a problem here. Reverse discrimination. White folk, so-called white folk, can say that we're coming up with something that's just gonna benefit black folk. That's reverse discrimination. The
We have a
state,
history in this country of policies that benefit just, white Americans, for example. The Homestead Act is a good example. And even if we look at, welfare, for the longest time until after 1945, African Americans weren't even eligible for, welfare.
well, I understand the
So we could
discussion.
look at the history and actually be able to prove some of this, that could be helpful.
All I'm saying, Dr. Casson, I agree with you, but I'm saying whether you want to agree that House Joint Resolution 10 was signed into law or not, it does give you the parameters for having the discussion and to determine who should be the beneficiaries. That's all I'm saying.
I think you have to set up a structure by which, when a person would come in to do something under reparations, that historically, most people can be traced back to their ancestry of slavery. They may not be able to go to Africa, but they can go back as far as where their ancestors came from under slavery. And I think you have to set that as a criterion so that you don't get people who might come from another country and they might be of African descent, but that does not mean that they are African American. So I think if you set that criterion, that there would be a check to see if there were ancestral connections to slavery, then they're eligible. If they don't, they are not. Period.
Thank you.
And I agree with-
Research on that if somebody else wants to do it with me.
And I'd agree with Dwight's point about, you just can't, throw around things. You gotta have a structure through which you can work all of this. And you can do that. It's nothing astronomical or outdoing. So I would just say proceed with a basic premise that those are the people that are eligible who have ancestry back to slavery in America,
Right.
nowhere else.
Thank you, Mayor Baker. That does remind me of specific bills that California just passed based off their recommendations. And one of them was for California to pay for ancestry research costs of any African Americans. So I think that, to your point, of course, because the other big point with reparations is fairness. So that we have to have, and like you and Brother Dwight both said, have to have a structure or a base point that everybody can see why these individuals, whoever is going to receive these reparations, as to why.
And I also would remind you that specifically, impounded Japanese citizens gave reparations for the 4 years of incarceration. Also, Native Americans were given the right to have casinos on their lands, which would then allow them to provide money to anyone who is of that particular nation. So there has been segregated, in a sense, specific provisions for people not all Americans can benefit from. Now, we can all go on the reservations and play on the casinos, but we don't get a check for the income of that.
So,
Let's switch gears a little bit. I got a question that nobody seemed to be answering for me. It has to do with the housing. Is it okay for me to ask it now, or should I wait?
can I ask just one question, Dr. Leandra, to the task force? I hear you, and I heard Renata's great recommendation to separate the task force recommendations into actionable versus those that should be advocated for on behalf of the city of Wilmington. I'm wondering if we were to send out, because clearly I'm not the expert on which ones are actionable and which ones should be advocated for, would someone on a task force be willing to identify which is which so that we can ensure the accuracy of the information included in the report?
Shawnee, on that point,
Uh,
I think that,
Chairperson,
Yes,
don't we got a motion on the floor?
we do.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Well, I think that we need to clear that up first. We're either gonna table it or we're gonna vote on it.
All right, so we can go ahead and vote on it. All those in favor say aye. Aye. All those
Aye.
against say nay.
Aye.
Any noes?
not voting.
One not voting. All right, the motion passes. Go ahead, Shawnee, you can.
Go ahead, no, Mr. Sonny, now we can entertain what you were saying, because that right there might, require a little bit more, researching about what is and what not. But we do have the, Honorable Mayor Baker here,
Yes.
who is versed on, what is a function of the city of Wilmington, mayor's office and city council. So he's a great resource. I don't know if it's a time and place to discuss it, but we have an ultimate resource right here.
So first I
You know,
want
a
to
number of recommendations.
First, I want to apologize and thank you, Darrell, for taking us back to the motion. Second, if Mayor Baker, if you're willing, I can pull
Oh, yeah,
together
I'll,
recommendations and
sure,
perhaps we
I'll
can take a
work.
first pass and then send it out to the task force if the task force is comfortable with that.
Yeah, most of the stuff is easy to distinguish between who really has the authority and who doesn't.
Thank you so much for that, Mayor Baker.
Does that need to be a motion?
I don't think so.
Because what I was gonna suggest is that the technical writer, he's the public analyst for the city? Is that correct?
He's a student that used to work as an analyst for the city, yes.
He doesn't work for the city any longer?
He does just in the writing capacity.
Yeah, so he's the public analyst.
Yeah.
Is what you sent me. And when I looked at his credentials, clearly, he should be a part of that
The discussion
with Mayor Baker as to
yeah.
what's actionable and also what's public policy versus what's law as it pertains to these actionable issues that we're discussing.
Yeah, I agree with that. That's,
Agreed.
Thank
we
you.
should do that.
Yep. Thank you.
All right, we'll move on to the next point. Shane?
Can I just ask one thing about housing? It was just one thing about housing.
Yes.
I just want to know, are we going to address the fact that the landlords, they require 3 or 4 times the rent, which is very difficult for, certain populations, and they argue that it's classist and discriminatory to be able to do that. So I just wanted to know, are we going to even consider that or touch that, or we're just going to provide help with the security deposits and not try to advocate for reform in that area?
So I think that would fall under the landlord tenant code, which is a state issue, but if you have any additional research on it, please send it over.
Okay, thank you.
On that point, if I may, Mr. Chair, the city of Wilmington has a case that involved the mayor filing a lawsuit against the treasurer, Belda Jones Potter, a few years ago. Was about 4 or 5 years
About
ago?
4 years
something
ago.
like that.
Yeah.
And the case involved the Chase Manhattan Bank that had purchased a bond from the city of Wilmington to provide affordable housing. Now, this money went to a quasi-government organization called the Wilmington Housing Partnership. And this became a piece of litigation in the Chancery Court. because there was over 300 or 400 of houses that once was owned by black people in the city of Wilmington that were turned over to the Wilmington Conservancy Land Bank. So this issue is one that needs to be revisited for the very reasons that Dr. Casson is suggesting. And I have information that I can make available to the Wilmington City Council Reparations Task Force on that particular issue.
Thank you for that, and can you please submit that
will.
to us, so that, again, so that we can compile that all into the rest of the research as well, too. Thank you. Moving on to the next point.
Yes, the next point is economics. The economics, we have quite a few recommendations. The first one is to create economic programs that develop Black Wall Streets and African American neighborhoods. Invest in capacity building for existing businesses owned by those of African Americans. Build intergenerational equity between generations of African Americans. Create and fund career training for those of African Americans. Provide a guaranteed income program for those African Americans of Wilmington. And Wilmington should support the August Quarterly as a major event.
Mr. Chair?
Is there any discussion?
Yeah, Mr. Chair.
Go ahead.
As a recommended follow-up, the City of Wilmington structure has several what they call quasi-government corporations. And first, I would suggest that the Wilmington City Council Reparation Task Force be established as a standing quasi-government corporation in the same way that the Wilmington Economic Development Corporation, the UDAG Corporation, and other quasi-government corporations that exist. And so we would be able to carry out the policies and implement these programs that is being suggested along the lines of Black Wall Street. So that's my suggestion, is that we have a Wilmington City Council Reparations Task Force developed as a quasi-government corporation to carry out and implement our agenda.
Thank you, and can you submit that to us in writing, please?
Yes, sir.
Is there any other questions or discussion on this point?
Only one, like a separation there, you provide guaranteed income. That would have to come from the federal level. It wouldn't even be at the state level.
Thank you. Moving to our next point, education.
Okay, with the education recommendations, we have to support early education for African Americans, offer college scholarships for African Americans, establish education centers that give instruction and care to students of African Americans while their parents are working, provide incentives for teachers, African American teachers that want to reside and teach in Wilmington, create programs for African American men to interact positively with children, African American children, expand programs to recognize youth achievers in all fields, build community schools in Wilmington rather than busing, increase access to education of the arts for students, for African American students, and teach Black history in schools on Channel 22, on DETV, and in collaboration with the Delaware Historical Society. Any discussion on those?
Mr. Chairman.
We have, hold on, one hand. Leandra?
I wanted to ask a question about security. Did you say anything about security or just making our classrooms safe, as well as that's a big issue right now, the safety part. But also, I don't know if that goes here or not, but we don't speak to having, resources in the community to address, safety concerns. I don't know if that's a part of what we should do, but I know that's one of the things that the teachers that I've talked to in the area in Wilmington were talking about, you know, that some particular, schools are just simply not safe for the kids, and so they've been working on trying to develop resources for those schools. So I don't know where that might fit, but I just wanted to make sure, because I said I would bring it up, so I'm just doing that. That's all.
Thank you for that. I think that's not necessarily in a purview of city council, but the different school districts that operate here in the city. Well, the 4 school districts that operate here out of the 5 who have schools in the realms of the city of Wilmington. So that could be something that we can ask them to advocate on our behalf for.
Oh, Mr. Chairman, may I?
Yes. Mhm.
On that particular issue, I did submit under the section dealing with education. The state of Delaware did address or attempt to address this issue by forming the Wilmington Learning Collaborative, which is a collaboration of the 4 school districts, and I believe elementary and middle school children. And the city of Wilmington, we do have a representative that sits on that board, and that's Mr. Donald Patton. Mr. Donald Patton is the chair of the Christina School District. So what I suggested is that perhaps we reach out to the Wilmington Learning Collaborative and see where these things might fit into the work that they're already doing, and perhaps we can adapt their plans for the city of Wilmington. So this is already being done, and to Governor Carney's credit, he signed this into law. I guess it's been, what, a year or 2 ago?
Yes,
The
yes.
Wilmington Learning Collaborative.
Yeah.
And I did submit that in writing.
Yes. We did reach out to the new executive director that they just selected over there. Again, they did not feel as though they were in the best position to come and present on it, as they had just been onboarded onto the process, and they were still working with their own committee on what their goals and expectations were going to be. So again, we can definitely reach out to Donald Patton to see if they have any additional stuff. But I think some of this stuff has to do, at least some of the education recommendations have to do with outside the school as well too, in that earlier education range that is not being met by Wilmington Collaborative. So I see this as a lock and step opportunity for us. And then also on the back end, trying to recruit and incentivize more teachers to move in the city of Wilmington to not only teach in the schools, but teach in the schools in the neighborhoods they live in. All right. Any other questions? I don't see any other hands. Moving to the next point, which is health.
All right, for health recommendations, we have to fund the creation of community wellness centers for African Americans, provide more health care services in African American neighborhoods, provide scholarships for those African Americans pursuing healthcare professions, improve the access of healthcare services for African American seniors. Any more discussion about increasing or decreasing barriers to African Americans?
I think here you got a different kind of situation too. You've got local health centers like Henrietta Johnson and other, and you got the 2 major health facilities, the Christina and St. Francis. So you're talking to a lot of private sector operations as opposed to governmental, except for establishing funding for scholarships or whatever. So I think people should understand that you really are dealing with private organizations when you want to improve this area.
Thank you.
Dr. Leandra.
Leandra? Leandra.
Sorry, I was muted.
Oh.
I did a lot of work in this, area, looking at Wilmington specifically, but I look for, trauma and mental health resources. And so, I just wanted to tell the task force you could look at those recommendations, and if you had, cause I added some recommendations and which he's gonna add to the document. And I tried to capture as much of the youth as well as the adults. But if there was something else that you saw, once you look at it, I'm open to, doing more research on it. But the main part was, some of the recommendations were the Trauma Academy that we have here at, DSU, where we look at, Black psychology, we look at, trauma and self-care. And so, like I said, I just wanted all the task force to know that I did submit the things on mental health and trauma, and I'm open to any suggestions or anything to add, because I did provide some of the research for you to look at as well, in case I missed something. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm going to forward what you sent earlier today. I'm going to forward that out to the task force so they have access to it.
Remember too, Wilmington has the Health Planning Council, which is made up of all of the providers and all that, so I think it would be good to talk to them also.
So I think we have one more point, which is environmental justice.
All right, for environmental justice recommendations, we only have a couple written as of now. We want to increase green space access and recreation opportunities for African Americans. And we also want to test air, land, and water in African American neighborhoods, as well as eliminate any toxins that are found.
Any discussion? Renata?
Yes, thank you. I'd like to add an item around working with DENRAC, the STEM agency, to clean up all the brownfields in the city of Wilmington. DENRAC is eager to work with property owners. We, Wilmington Alliance, worked with them in 2018 and 2019. That's how we cleaned up the brownfield in the middle of West Central City, one of them, and created a community park at 7th and West. And if, for example, there are properties that are city-owned, that could be a prime first sort of point of order and recommendation to work with DENRAC, and DENRAC has funds to clean those brownfields.
On that point, Mr. Chair,
Speaking to the mic.
on that point, the Route 9 corridor received, I think, $2 million, and I think Claymont, they received $1.5 million from the Bezos Foundation to look at the remediation of environmental contamination. I agree with the DENREC. There are dollars available through DENREC that those that want to participate in the Brownfields program. But I think more expansive than that is for us to tap in to the existing neighborhoods that are receiving all of these dollars, like Representative Larry Lambert's community. I think he said he was asked to come and make a presentation before this task force. But I think we also need to take a look at the Wilmington port, the Port of Wilmington, because there's a big project going on with the Wilmington Port expansion project. Now, this expansion is impacting the air, the water, and the land over in the Riverside area, as well as over in Southbridge. So I submitted research information on this environmental issue. And I can't understand why none of this information is included in the report.
Thank you. Any other questions?
I don't want to dismiss what you said, Brother Dwight. You did submit a number of articles. I would love to sit down with you to kind of glean exactly which portions of those articles that you want to have added so that we don't miss that key information as we're finalizing the report. So I'm happy to have a conversation with you offline to make sure that we capture the right information.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Excuse me,
Yes.
I wanted to know, I just put this in the chat, but I probably should ask everybody. I know that the USDA is going to work with the City of Wilmington, with urban gardens and community gardens, but I forgot exactly where we said it was going to go. I'm sorry, when I looked back on my notes, I didn't know, in what section, but it was to deal with food deserts and to deal with, areas so that the kids can eat, and families can eat, better food. And so there are a couple of programs that they have, but I didn't know where to add that.
I think that would be under this one.
Yeah, I think so. I think under this one it would fit. So those are all the pain point recommendations. I do want to say, before we go to the last slide, is that I know technically that discussion was out of order, but I do like Brother Dwight's and Mayor Baker's point earlier about establishing structure about who's going to actually receive the reparations. So I would like to, if I may, Chair, like to make a motion that we include a recommendation that we have funding available for those tracking their ancestry to prove that there are descendants of American slaves.
Thank you for that, Shane. Is there any additional comments?
I think one I'd like to add, I think council should be asked to establish a permanent committee on reparations because they're not going to be able to just they're going to have to work through budgets and costs and how do we do things. And this task force could still, as members, still report and see what's going on with a standing committee. And I think it will give you more status of getting things done than just throwing it back to the finance committee or whatever.
That sounds good to me. Leandra, did you have your hand up for something new or did
Yeah, just the last thing I wanted to ask about, because we were talking about the finances. I know that I started thinking around, because I'm the chair of the finance committee for the city of Dover for the unsheltered community. And so in that capacity, I started thinking about with this particular committee, did we have, as a part of our, how do I say this? I know a part of our mandate is to develop the fund and stuff, but I also was looking at grant opportunities and other things that maybe could undergird some of our success in these areas. Would you guys be open to at least, just giving a list of that I think would be helpful in some of these areas, some that I think would be helpful for the city of Wilmington, or is this not the forum for that?
May I respond to that?
yes?
Dr. Casson, yes, ma'am. I think that the House Joint Resolution 10 gives us parameters for, number one, determining who, in fact, is eligible or should be eligible for reparations, but it does something better than that. The state of Delaware is the corporate capital of the world. And when House Joint Resolution 10 was signed into law, it became illegal for corporations domained in the state of Delaware to continue to participate in slavery or to benefit from. And so I've been working along with my colleagues and my beautiful daughter. We've been working since 2017 on the African National Day of Assembly, Reparation, and Freedom Coalition. And one of the things that I've suggested is that there is a voluntary disclosure act that we can ask the General Assembly to utilize on our behalf to determine which of the 1 million corporations, of which 60% of them are Fortune 500 corporations, which one of them are still benefiting from the vestiges of slavery and involuntary servitude. And we can do that under what's called the Voluntary Disclosure Act. And by doing so, we can identify the money to pay for this. Because the city of Wilmington doesn't have any money, and the state of Delaware has money, but we need to be asking the bond committee that's participating in selling these bonds that they need to make some monies available for the vestiges of slavery under House Joint Resolution 10 that would not only benefit the municipal government of the city of Wilmington, but it would also benefit the city of Dover as well.
Great.
I'm going to ignore the motion that was brought up. Don't forget the motion that Shane brought up.
You had a motion?
Oh, yes, it was stated. I went into, the motion was to add and maybe it doesn't need to be a motion, but the motion was to add that we include a recommendation that the city of Wilmington pays for that ancestry research for those that are descendant of American slaves.
May I ask you a question, sir? For your motion?
Yes, sir.
Would that also include establishing a permanent standing committee around reparations that we could report to?
Speak into the mic.
Does that include establishing, like Mayor Baker suggested, that we should ask city council to establish a standing city council committee on the issue of reparations that we as a task force and others can continue to work through? Since we're being disbanded after we submit this report, this would keep us alive in perpetuity.
So I think with both those points, it doesn't have to be a motion because we're still in the drafting stage of the recommendations.
So I could just formally send it.
So
Okay.
as long as you formally submit it in writing, I'm pretty sure we can work it in there.
Okay.
Good.
And I did capture it for both recommendations for the notes, so.
All right. I'm good.
All right. I think that is all we have in regards to that. Now we will move to the public comment portion of it. If you're in, if you would like to give public comment, please raise your hand. You will have 3 minutes to do so, and I will call on you. So is there anyone in person who would like to give public comment? No, seeing none in person. Would anyone online like to give public comment? Going once, use the raised hand feature. Going twice. Okay, that's 3. All right. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
I moved. Oh, second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
All those who wants to stay say no. Good night, y'all.
Good night, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. You too. So capturing those minutes